The Ancient Greek Atheists. The ancient Greeks were the first to explain the universe not by referring to gods, but through naturalistic mechanisms. For instance, Democritus famously believed that he could explain the entire universe by assuming that all matter was made of atoms. However, most of these thinkers still allowed for the existence of gods. Democritus, for instance, believed that the gods too were made of atoms. In fact, we know of no ancient thinker who openly called himself an atheist. And this was likely because the position was illegal, since well-worked-out atheist ideas definitely existed in Greece. And various thinkers were called atheists or atheos by others, which was used as an insult at the time. For instance, Diagoras was often identified by other Greeks as the first atheist, and we read that he had to flee Athens after a bounty was put on his head. And Protagoras famously stated, "Concerning the gods, I cannot know whether they exist or not," after which he was expelled from the city. Various of the famous playwrights also played out these atheistic ideas on their stage, hiding behind their characters to give voice to these controversial ideas. Euripides, for instance, had one of his characters state, quote, "Is there anyone who thinks there are gods above? There are not. No, there are not. Let no fool, led by the old false fable, thus deceive you." And there's much more to the story, and it is a story not often told. So join me now for a detailed exploration of the atheists of ancient Greece. Hey, good to see you. This is Stephan, author of In Search of the Sublime. On this World History channel, we'll trace humanity's relentless pursuit of scientific truth, moral excellence, and enlightenment. We'll meet anyone from Mesopotamian astronomers and Indian yogis to Greek philosophers and Enlightenment scientists. And you'll meet them firsthand using primary sources, giving you valuable insights that transcend the surface-level understanding you get on other channels. Go check it out for yourself. Let's start. Open critique of traditional religion had a long history in Greece. The earliest critic seems to have been Xenophanes, who lived in the 6th century and who denied the existence of prophecy and called the Greek myths, quote, "the fictions of our predecessors." Famously, he ridiculed that most mortals believe gods are born, have clothing, a voice, and a body just like them. He said, "If horses or oxen had hands and could draw with their hands, horses would draw the figures of the gods as similar to horses, and oxen would as similar to oxen." Yet despite his critique, Xenophanes was not an atheist. He instead believed in a more abstract God, quote, "one God, greatest among gods and mortals, not at all like mortals in body or thought." And he claimed that this God could not be known and required no rituals. Starting in the 5th century BC, the name Atheos, or atheist, became attached to the names of various individuals, mostly in the form of an insult. This happened, for instance, to Diagoras the atheist, who was often called the first atheist in ancient Greece. All we know about his beliefs is based on later gossip. For instance, it is said that he had lost his belief in the gods when a poet plagiarized his work, then swore an oath on the gods that he had not done so, but was thereafter not punished by the gods in any way, shape, or form. From this he concluded that the gods cannot possibly exist. Many witty stories became associated with Diagoras the atheist. When he was caught in a storm at sea, the crew blamed the bad weather on his atheistic thoughts. But then he just pointed to another ship in trouble, asking, "Do they have a Diagoras too?" He also became notorious for revealing and then mocking the Eleusinian mysteries, which consisted of a secretive initiation rite surrounding the cult of the goddess Demeter. The Athenians were generally quite tolerant about religion, but mocking the Eleusinian mysteries went too far even for them. And as a result, Diagoras was accused of impiety, after which he fled Athens in fear of his life. We are even told an inscription was put up in bronze, offering a reward to anyone who either caught or killed him. And then there was Theodorus the atheist, who supposedly went even further. He is said to have written a now lost book called On the Gods, in which he supposedly, quote, did away with all opinions respecting the gods. But unfortunately, we do not know specifically what this entailed. Did he only criticize the traditional gods, or was he against the concept of God altogether? We just don't know. And then there was Hippo of Samos. Aristotle would later complain that he could see no role for anything in the world but matter. A true materialist. The sophist Protagoras, in his work On the Gods, took the agnostic position, meaning that he wasn't sure whether the gods exist or not. Unfortunately, only the first line of this work has come down to us, and in it he unapologetically acknowledged the option that the gods might not exist. We read, "Concerning the gods, I cannot know whether they exist or whether they do not, or what form they have, because of the obscurity of the subject and the brevity of human life." I would have loved to have read the rest of this text, but it is lost, probably forever. We are told that the treatise caused such an uproar that Protagoras was expelled from Athens and his books were burned. A man named Prodicus was also often accused of atheism by others. He had supposedly claimed, quote, "The gods of popular belief do not exist." In his work called The Seasons, he even hypothesized that the gods were nothing more than deified inventors. The god Dionysus, for example, might originally just have been the inventor of wine, and the goddess Demeter the inventor of bread. The famous Greek playwrights on various occasions also used their characters to experiment with atheist ideas. The playwright Euripides, in The Madness of Heracles, has the father of Heracles complain that Zeus had not protected his own son. As a result, he concluded that Zeus must be either stupid or unjust. The father even told Zeus, "I am only a mortal, but I outdo you in virtue." In Euripides' play Bellerophon, we are introduced to the Greek hero Bellerophon, who belongs to a legendary family, the so-called House of Aeolus, which had a reputation for fighting the gods, or what the Greeks called theomachia. Their family tree is given in a 6th century BC document called the Catalogue of Women, which is structured around a number of women impregnated by the gods. And already in Homer, in the 8th century BC, we read that the character Bellerophon was, quote, hateful towards the gods. In later Greek mythology, he stole the winged horse Pegasus in an attempt to join the gods on Mount Olympus, which angered the gods. For the flight of Pegasus on the theater stage, Euripides likely used a crane, since the comic Aristophanes later used the same device in a parody of his story. Hilariously, in this version, the hero flies not on Pegasus to Olympus, but on a dung beetle. And the actor on top of this beetle, which is lifted up by the crane, calls out the crane operator during the play for moving him around too erratically. Pretty funny indeed. Unfortunately, only fragments of Euripides' Bellerophon remain, but among them we find one of the most explicitly atheistic quotes from the ancient world. We read, "Is there anyone who thinks that there are gods above? There are not. No, there are not. Let no fool, led by the old false fable, thus deceive you." And Euripides' atheistic tendencies were known, because the same comic Aristophanes joked about them in one of his plays. In this play, he had a seller of religious objects complain that Euripides had put her out of business by, quote, persuading all the men that there aren't any gods. Again, a marvelous joke. And then we have the Sisyphus fragment, which was attributed already in antiquity to both Euripides and Critias. We're not sure who wrote it. The story centers around the character Sisyphus, also from this legendary house of Aeolus. And in the fragment we still have today, we find Sisyphus explaining that religion is a social construct. He explained that life before religion was chaotic and violent. To prevent this, the people set up laws, quote, so that justice should be tyrant. But eventually, some people figured out how to commit crimes in secret. As a solution, religion was invented. We read, Then some shrewd man, wise in counsel, discovered for mortals fear of the gods. So he thereupon introduced religion, namely the idea that there is a deity who will hear everything said among mortals and will be able to see everything that is done. If you plan some bad act in silence, the gods will not fail to notice. And now back to the comedian Aristophanes, for he also had some atheistic ideas play out on his stage. In The Knights, we read of two slaves discussing whether the gods exist or not. Do you believe in the gods? Of course I do. Then what's your proof? The fact that I'm cursed by them, won't that do? Well, that is good enough for me. In The Clouds, Aristophanes satirized the philosopher Socrates. Unfairly, he depicted him as one of the pre-Socratic philosophers, who were known for their often baseless and wild speculations about the cosmos. And Socrates had little interest in this. Satirizing the pre-Socratic overemphasis on reason, he had Socrates reject Zeus on the basis of evidence and accept the clouds as the only true gods instead. We read, "The clouds are the only true deities. All the rest are nonsense." What? Why, Earth, you don't count Olympian Zeus as God? To which Socrates reacted, "What do you mean, Zeus? Stop babbling. Zeus doesn't even exist." The main storyline of The Clouds is quite brilliant. It tells of a deluded man who sent his gambling-addicted son to Socrates' school, hoping that he would learn the rhetorical tricks to talk himself out of his debts. But the plan, of course, backfires, because Socrates instead taught him to reject traditional values, including the respect for his own father. Quite a brilliant plot. But although funny, the play didn't help Socrates at all when he was taken to court and condemned to death for not recognizing the gods of Athens. Plato, in his Apology, even blamed Aristophanes for setting the people of Athens up against him. Various philosophical schools also experimented with atheistic thought. The Skeptics, for instance, was a group founded by Pyrrho, who claimed that there exist counter-arguments to any belief, and this then included the belief that gods exist. Skepticism became incredibly popular in Plato's Academy in the generations after his death. Carneades and Clitomachus, who both became head of the Academy at some point, applied skepticism to the existence of gods. Clitomachus even wrote a now-lost book called Unatheism, in which he gave a history of religious skepticism up to his day. Much later, the skeptic Sextus Empiricus, in the 2nd century AD, wrote a work called Against the Mathematicians, in which he critiqued various branches of philosophy and science. A small part of this work is dedicated to arguments for and against the existence of gods. For instance, he reasoned that a god cannot be both good and omnipotent, since the world is filled with so much unnecessary suffering. After going to a whole list of arguments, he then concluded that since, quote, "the arguments on either side are equally strong, the gods exist no more than they do not." Only Attius, also from the 2nd century AD, in a few pages of his work Placita, presented atheistic arguments without any excuse, without presenting counter-arguments, and without labeling the arguments as morally objectionable, as most writers did on the subject, for fear of persecution. Yet, even Attius does not call himself an atheist. And then we have the Epicureans, founded by Epicurus in the 3rd century BC. Epicurus followed Democritus' theory that everything, including the gods, were made of atoms. This, he claimed, was even true for the soul itself. And after death, the atoms of the soul would simply disperse, leaving no room for an afterlife. A very controversial idea at that point. Epicurus also saw no need for a creator, but instead believed that the world was made by the chance collisions of endless eternal particles. Because of these ideas, the Epicureans were often called atheists by others, but this label was strongly resisted by Epicurus himself, as he did believe in atomic gods. Yet he also believed that these gods did not intervene in the lives of human beings and that they had no interest in rituals. So in practice, this is de facto atheism. Epicurus' greatest follower was the Roman philosopher Lucretius, who lived in the 1st century BC. In his poetic masterpiece on the nature of things, he offered a strong critique of religion, calling it irrational and harmful. According to Lucretius, Epicurus was a great hero leading an assault on religion. He writes, "When human life lay on the ground, foully oppressed for all to see under the weight of religion, then first a Greek man, that is Epicurus, dared to raise his mortal eyes to meet hers, that is religion, the first to dare to confront her. Neither the stories of the gods, nor thunder nor heaven deterred him, and so religion now in turn lies beneath our feet, trampled, and his victory raises us to heaven." Ironically, Lucretius purposely wrote this text in poetic form that was traditionally associated with theology, and at some point he even compares Epicurus to a god. Much later, the Greek satirist Lucian, in the 2nd century AD, who lived in Roman-ruled Syria, used humor to play out the atheistic tendencies of the different schools of philosophy. In his text Zeus Refuted, for instance, Zeus is confronted by a clever cynic that is a follower of Diogenes, who exposes the irrational aspects of Zeus's mythology. For instance, how can Zeus be all-powerful while in the Iliad by Homer, he does not even have the power to save his own son, Sarpedon? And if our lives are predetermined by the gods, how can we be morally responsible for our lives? Hilariously, Zeus has no answers to these questions and ends the conversation with a childish insult. "You're an overbold sophist," he said. "I'm not going to put up with this anymore." In Zeus the Tragedian, we find Zeus lamenting his fate in tragic style. But eventually the audience figures out that the cause of his deep despair is that he overheard a Stoic, another school of philosophy, and an Epicurean debating whether the gods can intervene in the world or whether they even exist. Again, a very humorous plot. To his horror, Zeus found that the Epicurean was winning, and even the gods had to acknowledge the power of his arguments, but were then consoled by the fact that commoners were unlikely to understand these deep arguments anyway. And thus unfolded the story of the first atheist in world history, the atheists of ancient Greece. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to know more about ancient Greece or many other topics from world history, read my book In Search of the Sublime. You can buy it on Amazon or you can read it completely for free on worldhistorybook.com. See you next time. Bye bye.